This program is rated PG. It contains themes and scenes which may not be suitable for very young audiences. Parental guidance is advised.
Be advised that the views and opinions of the hosts and guests do not reflect those of the station.
Magandang gabi po sa inyo lahat. Welcome to our show, Heartbeat Live. I'm your host, Ray Orosa. Pag-usapan natin, again, some of the more important issues in our country. Sa gabi pong ito, minarapat kong anyayahan dito ang isang tao na madalas hindi nyo nadidinig, but he is a very influential part of what I call the government and Christian and Muslim dialogue. An instrument for trying to moderate, an instrument for trying to find peace, and an instrument to find a common basis for everybody to treat everybody. Wala na pong iba. Kasi siya po ay isang, he is a Tausug from Sulu, but he is the Dean of the UP Institute of Islamic Studies. Wala na pong himba kung hindi si Professor Jul Kipli, how do you pronounce it? Jul Kipli.
Jul Kipli.
Jul Kipli Wadi. Welcome, Professor Wadi, and thank you for joining us and being part of this program. We've had a lot of people who have expressed opinions here as my guest regarding the martial law, the problem in Marawi, whether martial law is good for Mindanao or it's not good for Mindanao. Nga lang, it leaves us with the question, is there any kind of solution that may be somewhere near or still a little far away on the whole issue of our problem in this nation between the Filipinos and our Muslim brethren? And sometimes we get a little bit confused because for example, as you know, my grandparents were the first doctors to the Muslims in Mindanao. That's why my father was born in Jolo. But, and they just celebrated the 100th anniversary of the hospital that we put up in Jolo.
The Jolo Public Hospital. Right.
But the question that we have here is, as a Filipino, many of my friends, many of our Christians, like to see the Muslims in this nation as our brothers. But I've also had a lot of people who are Muslim who tell me, no, we're not Filipinos. So, you've got a problem here that have got many facets. Ibang parang maraming mukha ang problema.
Right, right.
One is not just cultural identification, but also an issue of being a part of the Filipino nation. And I remember having talked to some of the Muslims who say, we're not part of the Philippines, and we never were, and we never will be.
Right.
I remember one time, because I set up a forum for the Muslims, and the vice chairman of the MILF was my guest. I brought him here to Manila, and he participated in that. And one day we were talking. Sabi niya sa akin, Ray, you must understand something. Sabi ko, ano yun? Ano sasabihin mo sa akin? Kasi tinatanong ko, ano po talagang gusto ninyo? What do you really want in this country? Sabi niya ganito, you must understand something. If I in my life cannot get what our objective is, my children will go for it. And if my children are not able to get their objective, then my grandchildren will go for it. You're talking about what seems to be an insoluble problem. What you want to do is break apart this whole nation. Now, of course, you want to go against 300 or 400 years of history.
Right.
Because there was no Filipino nation before the Spaniards came. We were a lot of little tribes scattered throughout the country. And the Muslim religion only came in here in the 16th century.
Oh, even earlier than that.
Well, that's what is claimed, but there is little historical proof.
There were.
Pero, well,
There were.
you can.
There were archaeological findings. There were stories of how they followed the trade routes, how the Makdumin or the early so-called Muslim traders and the Sufis
Well, first of all,
in the mystics
yeah,
came,
but you have to understand.
and how they spread in other parts of Southeast Asia until they reached the Sulu
Okay,
archipelago.
but you have to understand. Muhammad was not around until the 16th century.
What do you mean? In the Philippines?
No, where it started. So not the 16th century, but the 7th century.
Right, right.
The 7th century is when Muhammad started. Okay.
No, it was even earlier.
Well, that was when he lived. That was when he wrote
That was
the
even
Quran.
earlier. Because he was born in 570.
Okay.
So the 7th century you were saying, that's almost more than a century or 2 centuries.
But the historical books also say that he did
know,
not mount the Quran
in the
until much
Muslims,
later.
in the Muslims arrived here in Southeast Asia, some were saying as an extension of the Islamization, from the India subcontinent to China in
Or was it China
in
to
the
Pakistan?
Nusantara or the Southeast Asia, even as early as the 9th, 10th century. And this is spread eventually into the Sulu archipelago, so that there are actually archaeological facts, like for instance the tomb in Holo, where your grandfather was so active in the early 20th century. You can still visit the tomb of Tuan Makbalu. So if there was a tomb, as they say it's around 12th century, probably there were even Muslims who came even earlier than that. So what we are saying is Islam had been entrenched in Southeast Asia for a long time, including the Sulu archipelago and the rest of Mindanao, particularly with the establishment of the Sultanate in 1415 in the Sulu archipelago, in 1515 in Maguindanao. So that was probably a century or more before the coming of Spain.
Of Spain.
You see, so Islam was already
question
entrenched
that
in Southeast Asia even at that time.
But there was no question that when the Spanish arrived, the Muslims were already in Mindanao. That is not something that anybody
even
argues
not only
about.
Mindanao, but even here in Metro Manila or in the Manila area. You have to note that the first Moro that were referred to by the Spaniards were not Muslims from Mindanao.
They were Muslims
They
in
were
Batangas.
they were the Muslims, part of the what you call the budding Islamic Sultanate in Manila,
The trading, the trading.
headed by Raja Sulaiman, Raja Lakandula, and Raja Matanda.
Okay.
So they were the original Moros, not the Muslims in the south. You see? So therefore, the people of Manila at that time should claim that they were the first Moros. Not the Tausug, not the Maguindanao, not the Maranaos in Mindanao. Because they were the ones who were referred to as Moros by Legazpi and Martin de Goite. There was in fact a treaty of friendship between Raja Sulaiman and Martin de Goite. And they were referred to as Moros by Martin de Goite.
Yeah, the word Moros kasi came from the North African countries that Spain dealt with. That was where the origin of the original of the word Moro came from.
Right.
And so the people of Spain who came here and saw that these people were worshippers of Allah or followed the Muslim tradition were then referred to by them by what they knew as their common name at that time, and that was Moros.
Yes, well, there's really no problem with that, but they were bringing that kind of stigma they experienced under the rule of the Moors for around 700 to 800 years. and they brought that kind of hatred, you know,
To the Muslims.
to the early peoples in the area at the time. I mean, what wrong that the early inhabitants of this island committed against them, but yet they were so atrocious against the early inhabitants just because they were Muslims.
Okay, let me ask you then a question.
That is how barbaric, you know, the early conquistadores when they arrived in
But I'm not here to defend the conquistadores.
Right.
The Muslims, as well as any other Filipino, were a victim of the conquistadores and the colonial practices of both Spain and America.
Right.
But what are you trying to say then, or are you trying to make this as an argument, that the roots of Islam in the Philippines are far deeper, and therefore they have much more abuses or history to overcome or to make up for, etc., and that somehow gives a legitimacy to what is happening now in this country?
Well, partly. It's deeper. The presence of Islam is deeper, or was even deeper. And there was oppression for a long time due to continuing onslaught of colonialism and so on and so forth. So that according to an author, there were two peoples that were created, one that was conquered and the other one who were unconquered. And the conquered ones happens to be the recipients of independence during the American period. You know, there was a collusion among the early Filipino nationalists with the American imperialists. That is why they control Mindanao and the Sulu archipelago.
Although,
so in a sense, they were the recipients of colonialism during the Spanish period and during the American imperialism. Then they became the new colonizers.
And what you want to do is to reverse that?
On the Moro land. No, I think what the Moro movements would like to have is a kind of a fair arrangement.
What is fair except what you want?
Not necessarily. I mean, what was taken from them were their lands, their freedom, their sovereignty, and so on. They don't want to have what they do not they don't own.
So how far in history do you want to go?
I think it's not really a going back to the past. It's
you want the sovereignty back, you want the lands back, you want the natural resources back. But how far do you want to go?
That's why we're saying an arrangement. An arrangement.
I'm not sure I understand what that means.
Well, the autonomy that was as a compromise in the negotiations between, say, for instance, President Marcos at the time and the Moro National Liberation Front, that was an attempt to make that fair arrangement. You know, a kind of a territory that could still be considered as a Bangsamoro homeland, or that time Bangsamoro or the Minsupala, with certain amount of power and responsibility given to them, so that they can have their own governance, they can live with their own laws, and so on and so forth.
But are they still going to be part of the Philippines?
So that is an arrangement that they want to have.
I know, but will they still be part of the Philippines?
Well, the fact
Because
that
we cannot have two sovereignties.
the
Sovereignty cannot be divided.
the fact that there had been negotiations since 1975 in order to hammer out that kind of arrangement. Well, in the beginning it was autonomy. In quite recently, the Moro Islamic Liberation Front advanced an arrangement called sub-state.
Okay.
The Bangsamoro juridical entity.
Okay.
Now, with President Duterte's proposals of federalism, well, it might be a viable arrangement because the BBL was not passed last.
Yeah, because basically
in the previous administration.
Duterte,
So what we are saying
you cannot
is
confer
right.
sub-state in effect status. It's against the Constitution.
What we are saying is there has been an attempt, a series of attempts, to come up with a viable arrangement
and we're not yet
between a majority Filipinos and the minority Bangsamoros.
Okay. Now, we have to pause for a few reminders, but we will be right back.